This is in the car park at 250 Western Avenue, and it's the end of the sequence from Dimension Jump where the starboat comes down over the ocean and crashes into the rocks. We'd spent a considerable amount of time actually doing the shots of the starboat flying over the ocean and never got the close-up of it actually impacting on the rocks itself. So that was something that we decided to remount. Because we had a problem with the line breaking, didn't we?
When we shot Starboat crashing into the sea, we had, basically because of budget restrictions, we had one day at the Pinewood water tank, the exterior tank, but it was in November, so the light for filming had gone by about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so it was a complete panic-stricken day, and they had to rig something like a 300-foot wire to fly Starboat down, and the first time they tensioned it, it snapped. So we lost a lot of time, and basically we got the basic master shot of it skidding down and hitting the water, but we didn't get the close-ups. So that's why we had to redo some of this in the car park with water hoses and Starboat on a rod.
Just being literally on cue, slammed forward into the rocks. Couple of quick shots just to take you through. This was my bench at 250 Western Avenue, starting construction of the domed city, again from Dimension Jump. So a lot of the models have started here. The usual technique of timber and plastic shapes clad with an awful lot of model kit parts. That's the same model in the model stage with foreground polystyrene rocks and tons of builder's sand being spread around with a broom to try and get the basic landscape. And then the next one is the lighting setup from Peter's camera position. That's our old Vincent Dolly in the foreground. And we had all sorts of dry ice, and that particular shot had all the lights sort of reflected into the model. So
front projected windows, which I absolutely hate because they're made of little tiny pieces of reflective material which only work if you bounce the light straight into them back into the lens. And lining it up was an absolute nightmare. So since that particular model, I've always said, don't use front projection windows. It's a pain in the neck to set up.
Yes, this was Record 3, which we started building the hangar for, and that was, we were building it in our model stage at 250 Western Avenue. I just remember this being very new to the department. I'd only started, I don't know, about 6 months before this work started. And that was really the first time we all sort of worked together as a team, and sort of 20 years later we're still working together. But yes, that was one side of the hangar as you look down it. MDF construction with lots of back forms, which is sheets of plastic, and dressing anything you could find really, which we call wiggeting, and just try and get as much detail into it.
The worst hairstyle of the evening.
Sod off. It was 1987, Mike. What do you expect me to look like? Thankfully, you can't see the pixie boots.
Well, that's the exterior of the Red Dwarf, the corridor that you saw earlier. Again, this particular model lasted a good 3 or 4 years before it finally was consigned to the skip as a burnt and charred mess. Again, filming on 35mm, and again in the purpose-built stage at Kendall Avenue, at Western Avenue. This again is back into season 3, and this was the setup we had for the starboat flying into clouds, which gets used a considerable amount of time. The basic setup was 2 zip-up towers with a flying rail suspended between the 2 of them. The starbug itself is suspended from a trolley that flies down that rail, and the tabletop was just gallons upon gallons of dry ice being poured into it, and as much smoke as we could get into the atmosphere.
I thought it'd be a good idea at this point to do a handheld shot of starboat, lying in the dry ice, pointing the camera up to get a kind of air-to-air feel, not realising that once I'd laid down inside the dry ice I couldn't actually breathe. So I felt quite giddy and sat up rather quickly. But we got the shot in the end.
That's the motion control rig at Peerless.
I've no idea who the people are in the shot there. Is that Rocky holding his head? Yes, in angst. That's,
and the blue midget just visible on the left.
Oh yeah, right. This is one of the earliest motion control rigs in this country, commissioned in 1985, I think it was, which I ran for a period of time, and that's where we shot the Series 1 shots of Red Dwarf, and then the Series 3 stuff with Starbug and the Blue Midget flying in space. Shots that weren't achieved on wires in that particular time. And then for Series 2 we also did the stuff in the model unit, which is much more enjoyable. When you're shooting motion control, it's all very controlled and it goes at a very slow rate, but it's not as enjoyable as doing stuff like this where you can get dirty and get involved with the actual goings on.
I mean, here we're doing sequences for Back to Reality where everything was shot dry, but we were shooting through a 1 foot deep tank to actually give the impression of water in the foreground.
It's an old, very old technique used on the Stingray series, I think, for the first time, where they filmed through what is effectively just a wall of water with weeds and things, and for little bubbles moving up through the water, we used Alka-Seltzer tablets.
And for some reason, right at the bottom of the frame, somebody's brought in a clockwork frog.
I think that was mine, Mike.
Yet more Starbugs. I think this was, again, back into Series 5 or 6. They're all crashed, burnt and broken, so off we go again. Moose Base Alpha being built from Quarantine. One of my favourite models, I think. Nick and Rocky built this one. Quite a small set and done unusually in blue and gold. Not quite sure why you ever came up with that.
Rocky especially likes gaudy colours, doesn't he? He's very much a fan of Thunderbirds, where every craft has a very distinct colour and it's immediately recognisable. I think that must have got passed on to this little set, which worked very well.
And that's the final set. That's why, I mean, ultimately it's called Moose Base Alpha, in that it does have a sort of vague Moon Base Alpha feel from the top. But it's mostly sort of plumbing parts.
Yes, I remember we went down to B&Q down the Western Avenue and just bought as many. Again, it was quite a quick thing. We didn't have much time to make it, not much money, so we just went to B&Q and got lots of bits of drainage pipe and guttering, anything with sort of interesting shapes. Got a few little dinky cars, trucks, and just tried to make something that looked, a nice, interesting shape, and then set it into a landscape, which is, I think, it was all salt, mainly salt. The snow, and we obviously had like a blizzard blowing, so that was with the use of fans and snow sprays, and just blowing snow sprays through the fans to get the blizzard.
Another monster, Paul McGuinness again, back in the suit this time as the Siren. This was a scene in a quarry somewhere just outside London. I'm quite sure where. I seem to remember very late night, very cold, and the only one who's remotely warm, or the only two people remotely warm, are those two, Robert and Paul. Last three. I think it's Billy Connolly says that if you leave a man alone in a room with a tea cosy, it's only a matter of minutes before he'll put it on his head. So this is the Despair Squid, modeled by Nick.
So there was something that was adopted fairly quickly by Rocky, because we suddenly had to make a squid, and he made it out of the head of the demon, the actual body of the squid, and then just adding tentacles. I just thought they looked a bit Rastafarian, so I thought I'd stick it on my head. And as Mike said, yes, we just give them a bit of time, everything sort of ends up on our heads for some reason.
As did the emo ball. Which admittedly this particular prop was built to be worn on the head by Craig. However, this particular spacecraft was not built to be worn on the head.
What's Rocky doing with that tube?
And on that note, we finish the pictures.